Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking the extraordinary, constantly evolving life of someone you literally see every day, but probably don't truly know, Benjamin Franklin. Sure, we usually picture him as the grandfatherly statesman or just the face on the $100 bill, but the historical record shows someone way more dynamic. We're talking about a brilliant polymath who literally and metaphorically snatched lightning from the sky. So let's trace this incredible journey together, from a working-class printer to a pioneering scientist, a prolific inventor, and ultimately a profound moral voice for human rights.
Here's a quick look at our agenda today, mapping out the evolution of a mind. We'll cover the printer's rise, teaming the electric fire, inventions for the everyday, awakening to abolition, and finally, the blueprint of a nation.
Let's start with Section 1, the printer's rise, from Boston apprentice to media mogul. Look, Franklin's early life was completely driven by a pragmatic need to build wealth. He needed money so he could eventually secure his intellectual independence. He wasn't born into aristocratic leisure. The guy had to hustle. Born in Boston, his formal schooling actually ended at age 10 because his father just couldn't afford it. By 12, he's apprenticed to his brother James's printing shop. But Benjamin was way too fiercely independent to just be a subordinate. In 1723, he bailed on his apprenticeship without permission, which, legally speaking, made him a fugitive. He fled to Philadelphia, totally broke, but armed with this unmatched work ethic, and it paid off. By 1729, at just 23 years old, he becomes the publisher of the Pennsylvania Gazette, perfectly setting the stage to become a colonial media mogul.
Now, this quote is absolutely fascinating. Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. It's such a powerful, foundational statement on free speech, right? Well, it actually came from a fictitious, middle-aged widow named Silence Dallgood, which was just a pseudonym for a 16-year-old Franklin. When his brother wouldn't publish his writing, Franklin adopted this persona and literally slipped these letters under the print shop door at night. They became the talk of the town. Even as a teenager, he was already using the press to advocate for public liberty.
And here's a really crucial point. Despite all his later international fame, getting honorary degrees from Oxford, mingling with French royalty, he never lost his pragmatic roots. He always identified as a working-class printer, habitually signing his letters with the incredibly unpretentious B. Franklin printer. He saw the printing press not just as a business, but as a vital tool to instruct Americans and build a cohesive community network.
Moving into Section 2, Taming the Electric Fire, Sparking a Scientific Revolution.
So, with his financial freedom eventually secured by that massive printing success, Franklin completely pivots in the 1740s to an era of unbridled scientific discovery. He gets obsessed with this mysterious phenomenon that, back then, was mostly just used for parlor tricks: electricity. Before Franklin, scientists actually believed electricity was two totally different types of fluids. Franklin comes along and is the very first to propose it was a single fluid. And get this, he was the first to label electrical charge as positive and negative. He established the principle of conservation of charge. Think about that for a second. The exact terms we still use every day for our batteries and electronics were coined by this self-educated printer from Philly.
But of course, his most famous experiment involves a stormy sky. Now, I have to ask this question, because the popular mythology almost always gets this critical historical detail completely wrong. We all have that image in our heads of Franklin holding a kite string as a massive bolt of lightning strikes it directly, right? Well, let's look at the reality. He actually used the kite to draw ambient electrical charge from the storm clouds into a Leyden jar. Waiting around to be struck directly would have been a fatal blunder. In fact, just a few months after Franklin's experiment was published, a scientist in Russia named George Wilhelm Richman tried to replicate it and was tragically electrocuted. Franklin knew the dangers. He stood on an insulator, keeping perfectly dry under a roof, carefully proving that lightning and laboratory electricity were the exact same thing. It wasn't all perfectly calculated, though. He did make a few hilarious mistakes. Because Franklin was so obsessed with finding practical uses for his discoveries, he once proposed a dinner party where a turkey would be killed via electric shock and then roasted on an electrical spit. Well, during one of these experiments, he accidentally shocked himself with a pair of charged jars. It resulted in this intense numbness in his arms that lasted all evening. He later wrote that he was, quote, ashamed to have been guilty of so notorious a blunder.
Which brings us right to Section 3, Inventions for the Everyday, Practical Solutions for Mankind.
That turkey anecdote perfectly captures his mindset. He didn't just study science for the sake of abstract theory. He had a deep drive to apply these discoveries directly to everyday life to help people.
Just look at this incredible list. Based on his kite experiment, he invents the lightning rod to protect buildings from fires. His eyesight starts getting worse. He invents bifocal glasses. He created the glass harmonica, which is a musical instrument that Mozart and Beethoven literally composed music for. But his inventions weren't just physical objects, they were civic institutions too. He founded the first subscription library in America and Philadelphia's first volunteer firefighting company. His mind was just constantly iterating on mechanical and civic problems. And what's truly remarkable about all these inventions is his absolute refusal to patent a single one of them. Remember how his early life was spent desperately trying to accumulate wealth? Once he had enough, his focus entirely shifted. He firmly believed his inventions should serve humanity freely and generously. It's a stunning reminder of his commitment to the public good.
All of this was possible because he followed a very specific life formula. Step 1, accumulate wealth through printing. Step 2, in 1747, he formed a partnership with his foreman, David Hall, to split the shop's profits. That brilliant business arrangement bought Franklin leisure time. It allowed him to step back from daily labor. And step 3, he dedicated that newly found time for the rest of his life to scientific and civic breakthroughs. Let's look at Section 4, Awakening to Abolition, a profound moral evolution. Perhaps his greatest and most important iteration wasn't a piece of technology or a scientific discovery. It was his own profound moral shift. To understand the real human behind the legend, we have to look impartially at the historical record and see how a man of his time could awaken to the inherent evils of an institution that was deeply embedded all around him. His views on slavery evolved drastically over a lifetime. As a younger man in the 1730s, Franklin actually owned slaves who worked in his household, and he allowed the sale of slaves through advertisements in his newspaper. But as he traveled, read, and engaged with Enlightenment ideals, his perspective radically changed. By 1758, he's actively advocating for the education of enslaved people. In 1785, he returned to North America and freed his own slaves. By 1787, he had become the president of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, and in 1790, shortly before his death, he formally petitioned the United States Congress to completely abolish slavery. By the end of his life, he viewed the institution as, in his own words, an atrocious debasement of human nature. And he didn't just stop at abolition. He wrote essays stressing the critical importance of integrating African Americans into American society as free and equal citizens. He looked inward, recognized a horrific societal wrong, and spent his final years actively trying to dismantle it. Finally, Section 5, the Blueprint of a Nation, the ultimate iteration. Franklin constantly improved his businesses, his scientific understanding, his civic surroundings, and his own morality. All of this laid the groundwork for his ultimate project, an entire country. He essentially lived multiple extraordinary lives in one. He was the only person to sign all the major founding documents of the United States: the Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of Paris, and the U.S. Constitution. He served as the first Postmaster General, setting up a national communications network. He was the first U.S. ambassador to France, where his immense fame as a scientist was absolutely vital in securing the French military aid that ultimately won the American Revolution.
I'll leave you with this provocative thought to cap off our explainer today. Franklin's life was defined by the belief that absolutely nothing is finished. Not science, not society, and certainly not the self. He was always editing, always improving. So, as you think about his legacy, consider this. How does Benjamin Franklin's personal evolution mirror the ongoing growth of the society he helped invent? Are we today still iterating on the American experiment, striving for that exact same constant improvement? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning, keep learning, and keep iterating.